My name's Tim. I'm a 99th percentile MCAT tutor and a second-year medical student. I've been working with MCAT self-prep since 2017, and I'm here today to share with you my guide to doing well on the Casper test and multiple mini interviews in general. The way that I see it, multiple mini interviews and the MCAT are almost like complete opposites. In terms of the pre-med spectrum, we have the MCAT. It's this huge, daunting, 8-hour test, and we spend hundreds of hours preparing for it. On the other hand, though, we have the Casper test. This is a newer test used for admissions at a growing number of schools, and the way that it works is it's going to give you 12 5-minute segments. Each of them is graded by a different rater, and in that time you're going to be shown either a minute-long video prompt or given a written prompt. Something along the lines of, tell me about a time that you faced a challenge. Something very broad that everyone can say they have multiple experiences for. Then, you have a couple of seconds to think about the 3 different questions they're asking you based on that prompt, and you have 5 minutes to give 3 paragraph answers. Now, you can see that's very rushed. You have to type quickly, and you have to make sure that you have the ideas in order to answer all 3 of these questions. They're very different in terms of the question answering style and what they're looking for. The MCAT has definitive correct answers. The MMI, or Casper in general, does not have the same type of definitive, this is the model answer we're looking for. With that said, there's still tips and there's still strategies you can use to improve your score on Casper. The information we know about the Casper test is also very limited. We do know that each of your 12 sets of prompts is graded by a different rater, so they're going to be looked at individually. They do have some FAQs available on their website, and we'll talk about those a little bit later. But some of the biggest tips are making sure that you answer every question and you read all of the prompts to make sure your answers aren't duplicating themselves too much. Again, you're limited on time, so you don't want to spend the time that it takes to type the same thing into 2 different boxes on this test. The other thing we do know is that they offer 1 practice test, and that practice test has only a limited number of questions and doesn't give you direct feedback saying you will get a 5 out of 9 or a 4 out of 9 or an 8 out of 9. You can see some model answers online, and there are some third-party companies that do offer prep, but you should really be careful with those because those will spoil those practice questions that we're talking about. A Casper survey also said that the average student spends 2 hours or less preparing for Casper, and that reading through their FAQs and doing the practice test improves your score by a 1/9 of a point, or a 1/6 of a point, potentially. So again, you may not think that's a humongous jump, but on a scale of 1 to 9, that can be significant. So it's worth doing a little bit of prep and watching a video like this and doing the practice problems. MCAT self-prep already has our own course on admissions consulting. We already have a document with over 500 interview questions that you could be asked, and that can be very similar to the written prompts that you could be facing on Casper or that you could face in a multiple mini interview on med school interview day. With that said, there still is a lack of true Casper prompts available, so I want to make sure that we could create one and give you some model answers here just as a little bit of extra feedback. So imagine a minute-long video prompt right now. There's 2 friends on camera and they're talking about how their 3rd roommate wants to move out 10 months before their lease is over. Due to changing times, their girlfriend no longer had to live out of state and they want to move in together. These 2 roommates feel bad that the lease is being ended so suddenly, but they don't know what to do about it. So they're asking you for advice. There's 3 different questions that would be associated with a video prompt like this. You have a few seconds to read them and then your 5 minutes is going to start. The 3 questions could be something along the lines of, 1. As a trusted friend, what would you recommend those 2 friends do? 2. What strategies could these 2 roommates use in order to have a productive conversation with that 3rd roommate? And 3. Do you believe that when you've made a commitment to someone, you should do your best to uphold that agreement? You can see that 2 of the 3 questions were very focused on the video prompt that you just watched, and the 3rd one's a little bit more general, asking more about general characteristics or personal values. And for each of these, there's one way I would recommend answering this. This is a very well-proven interview method that you could have heard about in business classes even, and it's called the STAR method of interviewing. The STAR method of interviewing, the way that it's set up, you're going to try and frame your answers in a complex way to show that you're a complex moral thinker, you've really thought through the consequences of your actions, and you can really make your decision making and the results make sense. So let's go a little bit into what the STAR method actually entails. The S in the STAR method stands for situation. You want to give at least a sentence, just kind of summarizing the video prompt, or if it was a written prompt, spending time describing the situation that was at hand. Why do you have to face this task? Why is this story that you're about to tell a good fit for the prompt? This is really trying to set everything else up, making sure that you give enough information that when you have to make the choice, you've given enough information that makes sense to the reader what you did. Next is the task itself. So you've already set up the situation, and now you're going to explicitly say, this is the choice I had to make. Here were the options. If in this scenario, it could be, what do you recommend these two housemates do? It's implied that they're going to have a conversation in the second question, but saying how you're going to have the conversation, the different routes you could go, the different methods or perspectives you could try and take, that should be listed in your task section. Action is where you actually have to make advice. You have to definitively say, I would recommend this, or if you're talking about a story that happened to you in the past, you would say, I did this. So for the action here, it could be describing exactly what you tell these roommates to do. And oftentimes, you don't want to just say, this is what I did. You also want to say, well, I considered this other option. I chose to do this because of this new reason. You really want to explain the thinking and the reasoning behind what action you're choosing. And you want to show that you recognize there were other actions. You're not writing about this because it was a clear-cut decision where there's only one obvious right thing to do. We're writing about this to show that we can take in different pieces of information, synthesize those, and figure out one path that's better than the other. And then the final step is talking about the result. You've made your action, you've given me context on why you made the action. How did it turn out? Is this something that you would be able to adjust in the future? Maybe something didn't go exactly as planned, or it didn't go completely how you would have liked. What that means is you probably should acknowledge, okay, here's one thing I would consider in a future situation like this. It can almost come full circle and describe for you, this is the next step I would have taken, or this is what I would do different next time, if there were something you would change. Now, I want to give some more specific tips for Casper and MMIs in general, as opposed to the wide STAR method of interviewing that can be used for almost every situation. Because the Casper test is limited and they're giving you these complex choices, you really want to make sure that you're taking the time to lay out the different options and say why you think one is better than another. The biggest way you can do that is by asking for more information. That's the easiest step you can take in terms of showing I'm clearly trying to consider all the information at hand, and if I could know more about the situation, I'll make a better decision. Oftentimes in the video prompts, because they're only a minute long, you're only getting part of a story or one person's side of a story. You could say, to better make this decision, I would like to have more information about X, or I'd like to ask about X. This is going to really show that you're using this information, taking the situation very seriously, and trying to make the best decision possible. The very next thing you could do is then write a conditional answer based off that information. If I learn that X is true, then I would recommend or do Y. Again, that's just showing I'm taking the information that's given to me very seriously and using that to inform my decisions about what I think is going to be best. You're really focused on making sure that you show you know how to handle multiple pieces of information and move forward with them. As a doctor someday, or any healthcare provider, you're not going to be able to diagnose someone just based off one piece of information, ignore everything else. You need to be able to synthesize and show that you're asking the right questions and thinking along the right lines, evidence-based decision making. The next part of that is also considering multiple perspectives. You're hearing one person's perspective or one side's perspective in these video prompts. There's also that third roommate who maybe there's more to the situation than they're letting on in terms of having their girlfriend move back into town. There could be so much more going on that you aren't aware of, and that's why asking more questions and writing conditional answers really does bring everything together. There's a kind of synergy between these first three tips, just showing that we're looking for more. The next step is talking more about that action phase of the STAR method of interviewing. I already talked about giving conditional answers, and this is a little bit different. The next step you can do is set up Although I know this is an option, I'm choosing to do this other option because of Z reason. Although I know X is an option, I'm choosing to do Y because of Z. This is something that's meant to show I know what the different options are here. I've thought this through. Even though I've been working under a time crunch, I'm still able to assess the situation and show I know what the possibilities are. And then you can jump right into your reasoning of why I think this is the right answer, or why I think this is what I would recommend. It's a really holistic way to make sure you're covering all of your perspectives. Now, this one I already mentioned, but I think it's so important that I want to recommend it again. Make sure you answer all 3 prompts when it comes to the Casper test. You are going to be limited on time. This is why doing the practices is going to be worthwhile for you. Sometimes those third-party explanations can be a little bit long, and you can wonder, how could I ever write that much in 5 minutes? Maybe you don't have to write that much, but you need to make sure you give multiple sentences, trying to appropriately answer each of the 3 prompts. Really try and give them everything. Give them your whole thought process, because they want to give you points, and if you only answer 2 out of 3, that's really putting them in a tough spot. They are going to really struggle to give you all those points that you deserve. These last 2 tips may sound a little more obvious, but please do not recommend anything that is obviously unethical or illegal. If you wouldn't recommend your little cousin do this in front of your aunt, or if you wouldn't tell an admissions committee member to do this directly to their face in an interview, you probably shouldn't write it. There's some prompts that could be related to crimes or cheating, etc. And you should be very careful, making sure you're not actually advocating for something illegal. You need to be ethical in all of your answers and to be a healthcare provider in general. My last tip, if you're ever in doubt on what action you should recommend, just try and think about what action will minimize harm or damage to all the parties involved. If you don't know if something is obviously best, right, or going to give the best outcome, at least try and think of what decision can we make that will hurt the least amount of people and that will hurt as little as possible. You can kind of think of it as the inverse of doing the greatest good for the greatest amount of people. This is kind of like its mirror image, doing the least damage to the lowest amount of people. Now, these are all the tips that I can think of before we go into actually answering those 3 questions that I wrote. Now, as you see these answers, remember, it is okay to have minor spelling or grammar mistakes. It is completely okay. They know that you're typing quickly. As long as the content of your ideas can still be figured out, it's okay if you misspell the word here or there. It's not the end of the world. When we're looking at these model answers, there's really an emphasis on trying to show this thought process. You can trace through these answers and see this is how the STAR method of interviewing lines up. Let's look at the first answer. We start with setting up the situation and asking for more information by asking about the third roommate's perspective. The next step that we're doing is saying, based on what that third roommate says, I would consider doing this. We're really trying to use those conditional answers to show the complex moral thinking. Then, we're also trying to consider the third roommate's perspective. There's a chance that the third roommate doesn't really want to move out, or they were just suggesting it as an idea if that's something that's not very thought out or not something they're committed to yet, just seeing what their roommates thought about it. You probably want to treat that situation very differently. If the third roommate is saying, no, I've signed a lease with my new girlfriend, I am moving out, and we need to figure out what to do in the meantime, or how to best end this. This is how asking for more information can be really helpful. You can see that we don't really get a chance to talk about the results because we don't know how the situation is going to end up, but the S, T, and A from the STAR method are still absolutely focused on and used in this answer. This second question was a little bit different. Instead of asking about a true choice or action that you have to make, they're asking what strategies could you use to make a conversation productive. This is a little bit different. You don't need to focus on results again. You can just talk about, here are some general characteristics I would want to emphasize. As a general rule of thumb, we want to be open, non-confrontational, and make everyone feel heard and like their opinion is being considered and valued. This is something that should be a general rule of thumb across all scenarios, in any interview, in any medical encounter that you have. You always want the patient, any healthcare provider, everyone to feel considered. It's the bare minimum of making sure that we're working towards a positive solution for everybody. Now, this final question, this was asking about more general characteristics. It wasn't as specific to the video prompt. It's more asking about your personal values. It's asking about your commitment of what would you do if you've already made a formal commitment to someone? How would you try and uphold it? And again, in the medical field, we know that things are going to come up. We are put in difficult situations frequently, and we need to be able to manage that. So, what are we going to do if we've already made a commitment to someone? Let's try and do our best to uphold that commitment however possible. It may not be possible to completely do everything as we laid it out. If I made a plan with you for 6 o'clock, but I got held up at the clinic and I'm not able to make it out then, I can still try and uphold the spirit of it. I can say, I'm held up at the clinic, I'm not going to get out until 6. Would you mind pushing the plans back to 6:30 or another day? I do really want to see you. Similarly, if I had some type of legal agreement or agreement to work with somebody, and we had some end goal in mind, maybe I can't take every single step that we talked about exactly as we planned it, but I can keep that end goal in mind. I can consider that one overarching theme or goal that we're moving towards and say, I'm still really committed to this. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do all of these steps, but I want to make sure that I'm still able to uphold my end and get the finished product that we want. And then I propose a solution or some steps that I can take that still will be close enough and still with that same goal in mind. It's not that I am trying to break the agreement completely. It's that I'm trying to do my best to realistically adapt to the scenario that I'm facing. Even if I can't completely 100% uphold the agreement we had, I'm still doing my best to honor it. Hopefully this gave you some good insight in terms of the kind of thinking that you want to show in a multiple mini interview or on the Casper test specifically. If you ever have any questions about admissions consulting, feel free to check out the MCAT self-prep course on it. And if you ever want to practice this, feel free to reach out to Andrew or myself. I'd be more than happy to sit down with you, answer a question that you have, or even spend a half hour or an hour going through a practice interview like this and go through some of the practice answers that you've written yourself. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.